I love Lego and I love trains. Today we're going to put the two together with this older Lego Maersk diesel locomotive and the new SoundTraxx Blunami. This locomotive is part of the Maersk Train Set that Lego released in 2011. It's modeled after a SD40-2 that Norfolk Southern operated, painted in a Maersk Sealand paint scheme in real life. There are a few components that we're going to need for this installation. The first is the diesel locomotive. We'll also need a Lego powered truck. This might have already come with a train set that you already have, or you can buy one from Lego themselves. We've already removed the plug and part of the pigtail on this truck because we won't be needing it in this project. Next, we will need a 9-volt battery box with a 9-volt battery. You can easily find these online or at your local hardware store. For control, we will be using the SoundTraxx Blunami EMD-2 diesel decoder. You can buy this from SoundTraxx or your local authorized dealer. Next, we will need a 2-watt speaker from SoundTraxx. To complement that, we will be using this 3D printed brick speaker enclosure from lifelights.com. In addition, for lighting, we will be using 402 pre-wired SMDs. We have already wired these in series, and you can find them on eBay. SoundTraxx recommends 1K resistors for lighting, so we will be using those. Now that we've gone over the components that we need, let's tear apart this locomotive to install them. First, we'll remove the cab. What's he doing in there? Then the dynamic brake fan. Just pops off just like that. After that, we'll bring our finger down here and pull this part of the hood off. We can pull these two sides off too, below the dynamic brake fan. Bring the handrails down a little bit to help you with this, and we can remove these two side panels. Next, we'll bring off the radiator fans. And finally, the detailed engine will come out. For wiring purposes, it's probably best that we remove this blue and black block up here. Next, we'll flip the locomotive over and pull out the trucks. Now that everything's removed, we're going to test our components for fitment, just so we don't have any issues further down the road. The battery box fits perfectly in this spot where the engine was. You might use double-sided tape to attach it, but for now I think we'll leave it loose. The Blunami decoder fits perfectly right in this slot underneath the dynamic brake fan housing. To mount the speaker housing, we did have to make a small adapter with 3 pieces. We'll be using this 3x2 plate, a double jumper plate, and a single jumper plate. To build this out, we'll take the double jumper and put it up there, and the single jumper will go down here to make a T. The 3x2 plate just goes in the middle of all that. Now we attach this assembly to the dynamic brake fan assembly, just like that. Then we can use the original side panels to just slide up here and bracket the whole speaker enclosure in place. Eventually, it'll all mount right there on the locomotive. When using a ribbon cable, it's very important to know where pin 1 is. On this plug and ribbon cable, pin 1 is going to be on this side, all the way over here. And it goes up from there. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Since we're only using wires 1 and 2, I'll separate those 2 from the rest, strip each of them, and separate them from each other. Now we're going to tin the wires. First, I'll add some flux to the wires I want to tin. We're going to take our solder, and there you go. Super fast. Then we will solder wire 1 to the Blunami orange wire, and wire 2 to the Blunami gray wire. And it's as fast as that. Now, to ensure proper insulation, we'll take some heat shrink tubing and slip it over the longer wire, in this case the decoder wire, all the way down there before we solder the wires together. Now we'll just solder the orange wire to wire number 1, just with heat, because we've already tinned the wires. That's a solid connection. Move the heat shrink over there. Melt it down. And our first solder joint is done. Now we'll just do the same on the other side. We'll test that joint. Now we'll just heat up this heat shrink. And there are our motor leads. One thing we will need to do is move the old coupler and side frame assembly from the old truck to the new truck. So we'll take the side frames off of the old truck. Just pop off like that. We'll take this T part off here. Pulls out like that. And then the coupler and step assembly pulled down out of the old truck. Make sure everything comes along with it. So next, you can take the decoder out of the locomotive through the slot here or leave it in. We just chose to leave it in to save time. We'll put the side frames back on the new truck. We'll let this coupler and step assembly kind of hang down there. And then the T plate will hold it all together. And there you go. Then you can snap it into the hole it goes in. Now that we have the motor installed, it's time to install the battery. For that, we'll need the 9-volt battery box and the red and black wires from the decoder. Because the decoder is able to fit through the hole in the bottom of the locomotive, we were able to solder the decoder to the truck outside of the locomotive. But for the battery box, since it's too big, we have to install it inside the locomotive. Once again, I'll be trimming to about 2 inches off of the decoder and off of the battery box. Since we need to take the battery box out of the locomotive to reinstall batteries, we do need some slack there. So we've installed the battery and the motor. It's time to test it out and see if we have motor function. So we've put the battery in the battery box. We'll flip the switch to on. And you can see that we have a blue light on the decoder itself. So we've opened the Blunami app. We've enabled Bluetooth on the iPad itself. And now all we need to do is connect to the locomotive. We're connected. Go to standard. I want that to go in forward. Now it's time to see if it moves. And it does. Reverse. There we go. We have motor function. So now that we have motor function, it's time to start adding features. First, we're going to do sound. It's a very simple and easy process, and I'll walk you right through it. Now, SoundTraxx decoders use 2 purple wires to power speakers, a positive and a negative. In this situation, either wire can go to either terminal on the speaker, but if you're using multiple speakers, you need to make sure polarity is correct. First thing we're going to do is trim the wire. Since the speaker is almost directly above this decoder, we don't need that much wire. Since this wire is so thin, instead of using wire strippers, I'm going to use the soldering iron itself to strip the wire. Press down on the wire with 1 finger, and about 1 inch away, hold the iron to the wire. Now you can really only do this with a silicone mat. After a second, pull it away, and it'll take the insulation right with it. I'm going to do the same thing on the other wire. As you can see, we've left some residue on the mat itself. That'll come right off with this. Now we can tin the wires and the speaker contacts and solder them together. We're going to use a SoundTraxx 2-watt mega bass speaker for this installation. On the back, there's a contact on either side. We'll just start by tinning those. So I'm using heat shrink tubing with this because the outside of the speaker, as you can see here, is metal, and the wire, the exposed wire, will have to go around that to get to the outside of the speaker housing. So I just want to make sure that everything is insulated and no unexpected contacts are happening here. Now that we've installed the wires into the speaker, we've placed it in its brick 3D printed enclosure, and now it's time to test it. So first, we'll turn on the battery box. And there you go, we already have a bell. We'll wait till it gets detected on here. Already, it's automatically connecting to that locomotive. And go to standard. It's going to collect some data here. And it blows its horn. That means that we have control of it. There's a bell. Short horn and a long horn. And we have sound. The next feature and last feature we're going to add is lighting. Now we've already gone ahead and pinch fit the surface mount LEDs under the headlights, reverse lights, and ditch lights. Now it's time to wire it all up. For the lights on this locomotive, we'll be using 4 wires. Because LEDs have a polarity, we need to make sure that the positive or red wires on the LED go to the positive common lead from the decoder, which is blue. The negative leads are going to go to the 3 function outputs from the decoder. Those are white for headlight, yellow for reverse light, and green for FX3, which we're going to use for ditch lights. The first light we will focus on is going to be the headlight. I'm going to trim the blue, the common positive, back about half of its length, and I'm going to save this other part because we're going to need that later. And the white, I'll trim that maybe about 1/4 off its length. First we need to prep the wires as we have throughout the project. We'll strip what we need to. Although these wires are already trimmed a little bit, we need to take a little bit more of the insulation off. Like that. To start the tinning process, we will again put some flux on our wires, apply some solder, and your wire is ready to solder. Because we're using LEDs, it's imperative that we use a resistor. In this case, we're using a 1K resistor on the function side or negative side of the LED. The trickiest solder joint is the function common. I need to join the decoder, the headlight, the reverse light, and the lead going out to the ditch lights. Of course, this needs to be insulated as well. Now we have one more detail to add, but for now, we're done inside the body of the locomotive, so we can button it all up. Our last step is going to be adding ditch lights. With the ditch lights installed, it's time to button it up for the last time. And there's the locomotive. Let's take it over to the test track. In this video, we've shown you how to install a SoundTraxx Blunami sound decoder in your Lego locomotive. We really hope you try this at home, and if you have any further questions about programming this Blunami, you can check out the Midday Modeler that's linked in the video description below.